Hello and welcome back to another update as I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Sweep Union, and in this update we start out in the direction of Novomykhailivka, where heavy fighting continues in the western parts of the town. We see here in this video here that the Russians are heavily bombarding the western parts of Novomykhailivka, as well as the fortifications located to the south of Novomykhailivka. This heavy fighting shows that the Ukrainians, despite all of this shelling, are refusing to withdraw and are instead sending reinforcements to the area to hold the western parts of the town. The main reason for that is if the fighting continues west of Novomykhailivka, the Russians will start attacking Konstantinivka here to the west of the town, which will lead to the Russians hitting the sole supply line in and out of Vuhledar. The roads here to the north of Vuhledar do not lead to any of the other villages. This means that any supply would go to Vuhledar away from the roads and through the open fields. The effect that would have on the Ukrainian defenders of Vuhledar would be that they would be in a very difficult position when it comes to their supply, as supplying through the open fields is very difficult in times of the spring season, where the muddy season is ongoing. If the vehicles drive through the open fields through the same routes, then they will eventually lead to a muddy road that will be impossible to pass through with normal supply trucks. As such, we see that an attack towards Konstantinivka by the Russians starting the battle of the town there would have a significant impact on the defensive capabilities of the Ukrainians by Vuhledar. This is why the Ukrainians are sacrificing their capabilities to hold on to the positions west of Novomykhailivka and prevent a Russian capture of the town, as that would lead to these consequences west of the town. In a northern direction towards the north of Avdiivka, the Russians have advanced in three separate directions. They have expanded their zone of control and foothold within the eastern parts of Novomykhailivka through an assault going through the town. In the western parts, the Russians have managed to capture several fortifications to the northeast of the Dacha area. This opens up a new front towards Novomykhailivka, towards the road connecting Novomykhailivka with Ocheretyne. If the Russians manage to capture the heavy fortifications that are located in between Ocheretyne and Novomykhailivka, it would significantly strengthen the Russian siege of both of these towns, and it may lead to the town of Novomykhailivka being completely cut off from supplies from other areas. In the eastern direction, the Russians are already reaching the road, and in the western direction, there's only one singular road, and that is here by the heavy fortifications. The heavy fortifications are located in between a crossroad between Novomykhailivka, Ocheretyne, and the village here to the north that has a very difficult name. This crossroad is very important. This is why the Ukrainians have built so many fortifications and heavy fortified area to protect it. If the Russians manage to gain control of it, they would be able to launch attacks in all three directions, allowing them to gain a significant advantage in the area and start the siege of all three towns and villages. In the direction of Ocheretyne, the Russians, after capturing the majority of the fortifications yesterday, have captured the final parts of it and gained a foothold within the village. This is confirmed by this geolocated footage here. And with this development, the Russians are now expanding their zone of control within Ocheretyne as they storm the town, which is a very important stronghold of the Ukrainian forces in the area, overlooking the whole area as it is located in the heights. And with the heavy fortifications around the area, the Russians are pushing through some of the most fortified areas of the Ukrainian armed forces throughout the front line to capture this town, and they are succeeding with the recent advances throughout the northern parts of Avdiivka. It shows that the Russians have made a significant breakthrough in the Ukrainian defenses and are fighting through all of these fortifications. In the direction of Novomykhailivka itself, there's also this geolocated footage confirming the recent advances, and with this, the Russians are expanding their zone of control in the eastern parts of Novomykhailivka, securing their supply line in and out of the town, and attacking the Ukrainian supply line towards the east of it, connecting it with the main highway connected in the northern direction towards Konstantinivka. As mentioned prior to the Russian capture of Avdiivka, with the Russian capture of Avdiivka, the Russians now have the ability to start offensive operations in multiple directions. In the northern direction towards Konstantinivka, there are several lines of Ukrainian fortifications, and the main one of that is the one that the Russians are moving towards through the fighting by Novomykhailivka and Ocheretyne. There is this line connecting here between New York to Ocheretyne. If the Russians manage to capture Ocheretyne, they'll have an overview over the Ukrainian fortifications by the difficult name village and Kalinova here to the north of Ocheretyne. If the Russians manage to capture these two villages, they will be able to move on to the next line and bypass the fortifications by flanking them from the western direction, after which they will look to capture all of the fortifications along the road and move on to the villages east of the highway. It is likely that the Russians in an operation in a northern direction, rather than moving northward through the highway headfirst, it is more likely that the Russians will focus on the flanks, launching a pincer maneuver by attacking the villages on the sides of the highway, moving through them in a northern direction and capturing these villages, bypass the main fortifications and defensive line of the Ukrainians by moving around it and then moving through the central highway with control over the villages allocated in the near vicinity of the highway, all the way from Surya and Novomykhailivka in the north and down south, creating two strong flanks to either side. The Russians would then be able to have a secure line of supply all the way up to the lake here in the northern direction, where the Russians would then look to either expand in the eastern and western directions by fighting over Toretsk and New York to the east, and simply having control over Alexandropol, which is isolated here on the western part, creating a large enough buffer zone here to the west of the highway before they launch attacks towards the two villages here to the north, after which the fighting will take place over the intersection just southwest of Konstantinivka. This would allow the Russians to cut off the highway connected between Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk and significantly limit the supplies going to and from Konstantinivka. This would be in connection to the Russians capturing Chasiv Yar in the east and then starting an assault towards Konstantinivka from the northeastern direction, which would be from the high ground towards a low ground position. If the Russians expand eastwards in connection with such an assault from the south, they will also look to attack through Toretsk and up towards Konstantinivka, attacking Konstantinivka from three separate directions. But this would be a long-term strategy, probably connected with the summer offensive if this took place. Other than that, it would be in a connection with a continuous battle of attrition, which would last many, many months, if not years, if no massive offensive takes place, or if the Ukrainian army does not collapse. In a western direction, west of Donetsk and Avdiivka, the Russians are now in a position where they are attacking towards Pokrovsk from separate directions. In the northern direction of Avdiivka, their attacks towards Ocheretyne is along the railways connected all the way to Pokrovsk from the northern side. West of Donetsk through Pervomaiske, fighting is now taking place by Netailove, which is connected by the highway going between Donetsk to Pokrovsk. And west of Marinka, fighting is taking place by RUAF, which is yet again another town located along the highway from Donetsk, moving through the southern parts and attacking Pokrovsk from the south if they move through that direction. So this is three separate directions where the Russians are fighting at in the direction of Pokrovsk. Finally, in the Siversk section of the front line, the Russians have made a small advancement towards the village, where now the Russians are located along the front lines of the village, the outskirts of the village, along the southern and eastern parts of the village. In the northern parts, the Russians still have a way to go before they reach the outskirts of the village. This is likely due to the heights here located north of Belorivka, which the Ukrainians are in control of, overlooking the Russian positions by the forest area. So the Russians are so far not leaving the forest area due to the height advantage of the Ukrainians and their defensive positions north of Belorivka. As for the southern direction, the Russians are now located by the road here by the chalk hill and are fighting along the chalk hill towards the village and have now reached the outskirts both to the southern and eastern direction. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon for additional content, and have a great day.